A brutal murder on a quiet street reveals how DNA evidence finally caught a predator in wait. When aspiring model Sally Anne Bowman stepped out of a car, she had no idea someone was watching. In the early hours of a September morning in 2005, a promising young life was violently cut short on a quiet residential street in South London. What began as a routine night out with friends ended in a savage attack that would shock the nation and leave a family devastated. The brutal crime remained unsolved for 9 agonizing months, despite intensive police efforts, until a chance encounter led to a stunning breakthrough. The investigation would expose disturbing truths about a predator hiding in plain sight and spark a national debate about how DNA evidence could transform criminal justice. Welcome to X by X Confidential, where we investigate the most shocking and compelling cases from around the world. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us as we explore these important stories. Now, let's continue with the tragic case of Sally Anne Bowman. In the quiet suburb of Carshalton, South London, Sally Anne Bowman was born on September 11, 1980. The youngest of 4 daughters to parents Paul and Linda Bowman, Sally Anne grew up with big dreams that seemed within reach. Standing 6 feet tall, with striking blonde hair and a natural presence in front of the camera, she hoped to become a famous model one day. People who knew her often said she looked like the supermodel Kate Moss, with her photogenic features and confidence. After finishing at the prestigious Brit School for Performing Arts and Technology in Croydon in 2004, Sally Anne started working part-time as both a hairdresser and a model. Her career was just beginning to take off, and things were looking bright. In January 2005, she joined a local modeling agency called Pulse Model Management. By April, she became the face of Swatch watches and proudly took part in their Alternative Fashion Week. Her portfolio was growing, and so were her opportunities in the competitive modeling industry of London. The warm summer of 2005 saw Sally Anne continuing to build her career. She attended photo shoots, practiced her runway walk, and dreamed of one day appearing on the cover of Vogue magazine. Her family later recalled how dedicated she was, saving money from her hairdressing job to invest in her modeling career. At just 18 years old, Sally Anne had her whole life ahead of her. But behind this rising success, nobody could see the danger that waited just months away on the streets of Croydon. On the evening of September 24, 2005, the weather in London was mild with a slight chill in the air. Sally Anne carefully chose her outfit for a night out with friends. At precisely 10 p.m., Sally Anne, her older sister Nicole, and their group of friends arrived at Lloyd's Bar in Croydon. The popular night spot was busy that Saturday night, filled with weekend revelers. The group stayed until 1 in the morning, laughing, dancing, and having fun with no idea that these would be Sally Anne's final hours. CCTV cameras captured Sally Anne leaving the bar. After stepping outside, she stood on the sidewalk for 15 minutes, her blonde hair visible under the street lights. She then took a taxi to a friend's house, where she spent a short time before making an important phone call. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend, Lewis Sproston. During their conversation, she claimed that her sister Nicole had been arrested for fighting, though this wasn't true. It was likely a way to convince him to come pick her up. Despite their recent breakup, Lewis agreed to pick her up and take her home. With Lewis on his way, Sally Anne took another taxi back to the center of Croydon, where nightlife was still active even in the early morning hours. At approximately 2:20 a.m., Lewis arrived in his car. Security cameras in the area captured Sally Anne getting into his vehicle. He drove her toward her house on Blenheim Crescent, a normally peaceful residential street. During the ride, the atmosphere became tense. They had an argument that grew increasingly heated. According to later testimony, they accused each other of being unfaithful, bringing up old hurts that had led to their recent breakup. The car pulled up near Sally Anne's home just after 4 in the morning. The street was quiet, with most residents asleep behind closed doors and drawn curtains. Sally Anne, visibly upset from the argument, got out of the car. Lewis drove away into the night, not knowing he was the last person to see her alive. The sound of his car engine faded as Sally Anne stood alone on the street, just steps away from the safety of her front door. In those crucial minutes after Lewis left, an unknown figure was watching from the shadows. Within a terrifyingly short time, Sally Anne was brutally attacked. The assailant stabbed her multiple times in the neck and stomach with severe force. As she lay bleeding and defenseless, the attacker committed essay against her. In a final act of violation, the perpetrator stole her personal belongings, her handbag, cardigan, underwear, and mobile phone, before disappearing into the darkness. What happened on Blenheim Crescent that night would shock the Croydon community to its core and start a police hunt that would consume months of investigation before finding the killer hiding in plain sight. The peaceful Sunday morning of September 25, 2005, was shattered at approximately 6:30 a.m. when a neighbor discovered Sally Anne's body on the sidewalk outside her home on Blenheim Crescent. The shocking scene prompted an immediate 911 call. Police and paramedics rushed to the location, but it was far too late. The young model lay motionless, her life violently taken just steps from her front door. Detective Superintendent Stuart Cundy of the Metropolitan Police was assigned to lead the investigation. When he arrived at the crime scene, the evidence told a horrific story. Sally Anne's body showed multiple stab wounds to her neck and stomach, indicating a frenzied and brutal attack. The medical examiner noted that the killer had committed essay after or while she was dying. The perpetrator had also taken several personal items, possibly as disturbing trophies. This was one of the most violent attacks I've ever investigated, Detective Cundy later told reporters, his voice grave as he described the crime scene. The level of violence used against this young woman was extraordinary and deeply disturbing. The first 48 hours of any murder investigation are crucial, and investigators worked methodically to establish a timeline. They interviewed residents along Blenheim Crescent, canvassed for witnesses, and collected security footage from nearby buildings and businesses. Soon they discovered that Sally Anne had spent the previous evening at Lloyd's bar with her sister and friends. The investigation quickly led police to Lewis Sproston, the ex-boyfriend who had dropped Sally Anne off shortly before her murder. In the early morning hours of September 26, officers arrived at Sproston's home in South London. He appeared shocked when told about Sally Anne's death. Nevertheless, as the last known person to see her alive, Sproston became the primary suspect. "I couldn't believe what they were telling me," Sproston later recalled during trial testimony. "We had argued, yes, but I left her alive and well outside her house." Police took Sproston into custody for questioning. During intense interrogation, he described the events of that night, the call from Sally Anne, picking her up in central Croydon, their argument about infidelity, and leaving her outside her home around 4:10 a.m. Despite his cooperation, investigators remained suspicious. His story about their argument made him appear to have a motive. For 4 long days, Sproston remained in police custody, while forensic teams processed evidence from the crime scene. Specialized technicians collected blood samples, fingerprints, and most importantly, DNA evidence that would prove crucial to solving the case. The evidence included samples from the essay committed against Sally Anne. "DNA evidence has revolutionized how we solve violent crimes," explained forensic analyst Dr. Margaret Collins, who worked on the case. "It provides us with a genetic fingerprint that can identify a perpetrator with near-perfect accuracy." When the DNA results came back, they provided a stunning revelation. The genetic material did not match Lewis Sproston. After 4 days of suspicion and questioning, Sproston was released without charge. The real killer remained at large. News of Sally Anne's murder spread quickly through London. Her status as an up-and-coming model amplified media coverage. Her photographs appeared on front pages across the country. The beautiful young woman with dreams of starring in fashion magazines was now the focus of tragic headlines. The public was shocked that such a brutal crime could occur in a residential neighborhood. Sally Anne's family was devastated. Her mother Linda appealed directly to the public in an emotional press conference. "Please, if anyone has any information, come forward," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "My beautiful daughter had her whole life ahead of her. The person who did this must be caught." As weeks turned into months, the investigation continued. Detective Cundy and his team followed every lead, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and analyzed countless pieces of evidence. The DNA sample remained their most promising clue, but without a match in the criminal database, the investigation stalled. The killer's identity remained a mystery, hiding somewhere in the sprawling metropolis of London. For Sally Anne's family and the residents of Croydon, each passing day without an arrest brought increased anxiety. Who was this violent predator, and would they strike again? 9 months passed with Sally Anne's murder remaining unsolved. The case file grew thick with witness statements, forensic reports, and detective notes, but the killer's identity remained elusive. The Metropolitan Police kept the investigation active, regularly reviewing evidence and following up on new leads, but progress was frustratingly slow. Detective Superintendent Cundy refused to let the case go cold. "I knew the DNA profile of our killer," he explained in a later interview. "It was just a matter of finding the person who matched it." Somewhere in London, he was walking free, but scientific evidence doesn't lie. We would eventually get our match. That match finally came on June 28, 2006, in an unexpected way. A seemingly unrelated incident occurred at a pub in Croydon called the Shipwrights Arms. Mark Dixie, a 35-year-old chef working at the establishment, became involved in a brawl during a World Cup soccer match viewing. Police were called to the scene, and Dixie was arrested for his role in the altercation. As part of standard procedure for arrests, officers took a DNA swab from Dixie. The sample was routinely submitted to the national database for processing. No one, including Dixie himself, could have predicted what would happen next. When we input a new DNA sample, it's automatically compared against unsolved crimes, explained forensic technician Robert Williams. The system flagged an immediate and definitive match to the sample from the Sally Anne Bowman murder scene. The probability of this being a false match was less than 1 in a billion. The notification of the match sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Detective Cundy received the call at his office. "It was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for," he recalled. "After all this time, we finally had a name to go with the DNA." Background checks on Mark Dixie revealed troubling information. Born in Streatham, South London in 1970, Dixie had a history of criminal behavior. Though he worked as a chef, his record included convictions for robbery and sexual offences. He had lived in various locations, including a period in Australia, where authorities would later investigate his possible connection to unsolved crimes. Most disturbingly, investigators discovered that at the time of Sally Anne's murder, Dixie had been living just a short distance from Blenheim Crescent. He had been hiding in plain sight, working at local establishments, potentially crossing paths with officers investigating the case. After confirming the DNA match, police moved quickly. On June 30, 2006, officers arrested Dixie at his workplace. When informed he was being arrested for the murder of Sally Anne Bowman, witnesses reported that Dixie showed little reaction. He was taken into custody and formally charged with murder the following day. News of the arrest brought a wave of relief to the Croydon community, and particularly to Sally Anne's family. "When the police called to tell us they had caught him, I collapsed," Linda Bowman later shared. And it had been such a long, painful wait, wondering if her killer would ever be found. But the arrest was just the beginning of another lengthy process. Dixie was remanded in custody to await trial, a period that would stretch to more than 18 months. During this time, prosecutors built their case, compiling forensic evidence, witness statements, and expert testimonies. For Sally Anne's family, the wait for justice continued. They attended every pre-trial hearing, often coming face-to-face with the man accused of taking their daughter's life. "It was unbearable to be in the same room as him," Sally Anne's sister Nicole confessed. "But we did it for Sally Anne. We needed to be there for her." While awaiting trial, Mark Dixie maintained his innocence regarding the murder charge. His defense team prepared for what would become one of the most closely watched trials at London's Central Criminal Court, commonly known as the Old Bailey. The proceedings would reveal disturbing details about the crime and the man accused of committing it. After 18 months of preparation, the stage was set for a trial that would captivate public attention and hopefully bring closure to a grieving family. On February 4, 2008, the case of Regina versus Mark Dixie officially began. The imposing Victorian architecture of London's Old Bailey Courthouse stood as a solemn backdrop to the trial of Mark Dixie. On February 4, 2008, the wood-panelled courtroom number 1 filled with legal representatives, family members, journalists and members of the public, all there to witness the proceedings. Prosecutor Brian Altman QC opened the case for the Crown. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice echoing through the hushed courtroom. "This case involves the brutal murder of a beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead of her. The evidence will show beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant, Mark Dixie, is responsible for this heinous crime." The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They presented the DNA evidence, which showed an exact match between samples taken from Sally Anne's body and Mark Dixie's DNA profile. Forensic experts testified that the probability of the DNA belonging to someone other than Dixie was effectively zero, scientific certainty by any standard. Witness testimony reconstructed the timeline of events on that fateful night. CCTV footage showed Sally Anne's movements throughout the evening. Lewis Sproston testified about dropping her off outside her home. Neighbors spoke of hearing disturbances in the early morning hours. The medical examiner presented detailed findings about the multiple stab wounds and the SA committed after, or as Sally Anne was dying. 3 days into the trial, the defense revealed their strategy. In a shocking twist, Dixie admitted through his counsel that he had committed SA on Sally Anne's body, but denied murdering her. His claim was that he had been wandering the streets after a night of cocaine use and drinking, when he happened upon Sally Anne's body already dead on the pavement. Rather than calling for help, he took advantage of the situation to commit the SA. "My client admits his actions were reprehensible," Dixie's defense attorney Anthony Glass QC told the court. But he maintains he did not kill Sally Anne Bowman. He found her already deceased and made a terrible decision in his intoxicated state. The courtroom fell silent at this admission. Sally Anne's family members gasped and comforted each other as they heard this disturbing claim. Prosecutors quickly challenged this version of events, pointing out that no other DNA was found at the scene, and that the defensive wounds on Sally Anne's hands indicated she had fought her attacker during the stabbing. The suggestion that someone else killed her, then completely vanished without leaving any forensic trace, after which the defendant happened to find her body, is beyond belief, Prosecutor Altman told the jury. It defies logic, science, and common sense. As the trial progressed, more disturbing details emerged about Dixie's past. Though the jury wasn't informed of his full criminal history, evidence of his character was presented. Former colleagues described his inappropriate sexual comments and troubling behavior toward women. A psychological profile suggested predatory tendencies. On February 12, Lewis Sproston took the stand. Initially suspected by police, he now faced the real killer across the courtroom. He recounted his relationship with Sally Anne, their breakup, and the events of that night. His voice cracked with emotion as he described their argument and his regret at leaving her alone. "If I had just stayed a few more minutes or walked her to the door," Sproston said, unable to finish the sentence as he wiped away tears. After 2 weeks of testimony, both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecution emphasized the overwhelming DNA evidence and the implausibility of Dixie's story. The defense maintained there was reasonable doubt about who had actually inflicted the fatal wounds. On February 22, 2008, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman rose. "On the charge of murder, do you find the defendant Mark Dixie guilty or not guilty?" asked the clerk. "Guilty," responded the foreman firmly. Sally Anne's family embraced each other, tears flowing freely after the long wait for justice. Linda Bowman looked directly at the man who had taken her daughter's life, her face showing both relief and unresolved grief. Later that same day, Judge Gerald Gordon delivered the sentence. "Mark Dixie, you have been found guilty of a brutal murder combined with SA," he stated. "The level of violence you inflicted on this young woman shows you are a danger to society, particularly to women." Judge Gordon sentenced Dixie to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 34 years before being considered for parole, one of the longest minimum terms ever imposed for a single murder in the UK. At this sentence, Dixie would be 70 years old before having any possibility of release. As Dixie was led away to begin his sentence, the full extent of his criminal past was finally revealed to the public. He had previous convictions for sexual offenses and had been suspected in other unsolved cases. Justice had finally been served, but for Sally Anne's family, the pain of loss would never fully heal. As Mark Dixie began his life sentence in February 2008, the ripple effects of Sally Anne Bowman's murder continued to impact both her family and British society. The case had exposed critical gaps in the criminal justice system, particularly regarding DNA evidence collection and retention. In the days following the verdict, Detective Superintendent Stuart Cundy held a press conference at New Scotland Yard. Standing before a room packed with journalists, he made a statement that would spark national debate. "It is my professional opinion that a national DNA register, with all its appropriate safeguards, could have identified Sally Anne's murderer within 24 hours, Cundy declared firmly. Instead, it took nearly 9 months before Mark Dixie was identified, and almost 2.5 years for justice to be done. The detective explained how Dixie's DNA had not been in the national database despite his previous criminal history. This was because his earlier offenses had occurred before widespread DNA collection became standard procedure. Had his profile been in the system, Sally Anne's killer could have been identified immediately after the crime. Linda Bowman, Sally Anne's mother, became a passionate advocate for expanding the national DNA database. In television interviews and newspaper articles, she argued that such a system could prevent other families from experiencing the prolonged anguish her family had endured. "If Dixie's DNA had been on file, my daughter's killer would have been caught right away," Linda explained during an emotional BBC interview. "How many other dangerous offenders are walking our streets who could be identified if we had a comprehensive database?" The proposal, however, faced significant opposition. Civil liberties groups expressed concerns about privacy and the implications of mass DNA collection from citizens who had not been convicted of crimes. Politicians debated the practical challenges of implementing such a system and the balance between security and individual rights. Despite the lobbying efforts of the Bowman family and police officials, the calls for a comprehensive national DNA register were ultimately rejected. Ministers cited both practical limitations and civil liberties issues as reasons for their decision. The existing system would continue, with DNA samples collected primarily from those arrested for serious offenses. For the Bowman family, the fight for justice didn't end with the trial. They worked to keep Sally Anne's memory alive while dealing with their own grief. On September 11, 2008, what would have been Sally Anne's 21st birthday, a memorial service was held in Croydon. Friends, family and community members gathered outside a Primark store in North End, Croydon, releasing balloons into the sky in her memory. Sally Anne loved birthdays, her sister Nicole told the gathered crowd. She would have wanted us to celebrate her life, not just mourn her death. These balloons represent our love for her, rising up to wherever she is now. The memorial was a bittersweet occasion, marking both the milestone Sally Anne never reached and the unity of a community that had been profoundly affected by her death. Local businesses donated refreshments, and a nearby salon offered haircuts with proceeds going to victims' support charities. In the years that followed, Sally Anne's case continued to be referenced in discussions about public safety, particularly regarding women's vulnerability to violent crime. Documentary programs on BBC and ITV covered the case, including interviews with investigators and family members. One such documentary, part of ITV's Unreal Crime series, aired on June 29, 2009, bringing Sally Anne's story to millions of viewers. Yet in a disturbing turn of events revealed in August 2017, Sally Anne's family disclosed that they had been forced to exhume her remains 4 years earlier. Her grave had been repeatedly targeted by vandals, causing additional anguish to the already grieving family. They had made the painful decision to have her cremated instead, keeping her ashes in a secure location. "Even in death, she couldn't rest in peace," Linda Bowman said through tears. "Who would do something so heartless to a murdered girl's grave?" We had to move her to protect her. The case of Sally Anne Bowman has left an indelible mark on British criminal investigation procedures. It highlighted the crucial role of DNA evidence in solving violent crimes and influenced police training on managing complex murder investigations. Today, DNA collection is standard practice, and the national database continues to grow, helping to solve cases that might otherwise remain open. For the residents of Croydon, the memory of what happened on Blenheim Crescent serves as a sobering reminder of how violence can shatter lives and communities. The area has changed in the years since, with new residents moving in and businesses evolving. But for those who remember September 2005, the echoes of that night remain. Sally Anne Bowman never got to realize her dream of appearing on the cover of Vogue. She never had the chance to develop her modeling career, fall in love again, have a family, or experience the many joys of life beyond age 18. Instead, her story has become a painful reminder of how quickly a life full of promise can be extinguished by senseless violence. As Detective Cundy reflected years later, some cases stay with you throughout your career. Sally Anne's murder was one of those cases. The brutal nature of the crime, the lengthy investigation, and finally bringing her killer to justice, it changed everyone involved. We can only hope that the sentence given to Mark Dixie provides some measure of closure for Sally Anne's family, though nothing can ever truly compensate for their loss. While Mark Dixie continues to serve his 34-year minimum sentence, Sally Anne's legacy lives on through her family's advocacy work and the improvements to the criminal justice system that followed her case. Her story, though tragic, has potentially saved others by highlighting the critical importance of forensic evidence in solving violent crimes and bringing perpetrators to justice. In the quiet streets of Croydon today, few physical reminders exist of the events of that September night in 2005. But in the hearts and minds of those who knew and loved Sally Anne Bowman, the beautiful, ambitious young woman with dreams of stardom will never be forgotten. Thank you for joining us for this heartbreaking but important case. The murder of Sally Anne Bowman reminds us how crucial forensic science has become in bringing justice to victims and their families. We'd like to thank you all for watching and for being part of our X by X confidential community. If you found this video informative, please remember to smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. We're curious to hear your thoughts. Do you think a national DNA database would help solve more crimes faster, or do you have concerns about privacy? Share your opinion in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and remember that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be served.